Welcome back. Moving forward in this brief lesson and also a hands-on exercise that I'll demonstrate. But first, I just want to talk about the different kinds of layouts. In other words, not all layouts that I'm going to be talking about. In fact, I'll just highlight three important key layouts that you can use within your Android Studio. And these are the most commonly used as well as the most powerful as well. So let's jump right in and take a look at the concepts of layouts. So layouts are simply that define the structure for your UI within your app, such as an activity that we've been taking a look at, right? We've been developing an app so far. All elements within a layout are built using a hierarchy of view and view group objects. So what that is think of the view as simply anything that you place on to your canvas or activity or that screen. So that typically draws something that the user can see and interact with. Okay, so that's called a view. So this could be a text view, for example. This could be a button view, and so on. The view group, on the other hand, is an invisible container that defines the layout structure for that particular view or other view group objects. So now you can embed or place multiple views into an invisible container or a box. So the view objects are typically called widgets, and that can be one of many subclasses such as button or text view. So here you can see the hierarchy of a view group that can contain another view group, and then of course can have nested views as well. The linear layout is one of the first layouts that is very simple and easy to implement. So this is a layout that simply arranges either the views in horizontal or vertical direction. So horizontally in a single column or vertically in a single row. Okay, so don't get that confused. When we talk about horizontal, you're referring to a column, okay? And when you're referring to a vertical, you're actually looking at a single row. So for instance, if you have your app bar or the toolbar on top, right? Let me ask you a question, pop quiz. How is it arranged? Well, the app bar is actually in a horizontal position, but it's actually in a linear layout vertically, right? So when you assign or when you create the app bar, when you place the app bar onto the activity, it's actually vertically placed. The linear layout is a view group that aligns all the children in a single direction, again vertically or horizontally, and you can specify the layout direction with the Android orientation attribute. So here's an example that you see of a sample XML, right, that you'll typically see within your own layout as well. So go ahead, as a quick homework or exercise, just open up your XML file. That's your activity XML or any other XML. Just take a look at the layouts. So it should say with the opening tag of linear layout, it could also say relative layout or constraint layout that I'm going to cover next, right? But at this point, just take a look at the layout that you have and then the various attributes such as the width of that particular view, the height of that view, padding, orientation, and gravity. So again, these are basic CSS, HTML concepts coming back to you, right? So if you've come across those, this should be pretty easy for you. If not, just for now, take a look at the actual structure of your XML. So linear layout, straightforward. Next is the constraint layout that I want to talk about. Very, very powerful, really nice to use. And typically, I would certainly recommend you being a good programmer or a good coding practice, typically use constraint layouts, which is a view group which allows you to position and size widgets in a flexible manner. So for better performance and tooling support, you should instead build your layout with constraint layout. In other words, always use constraint layout. So different types of constraints that you can use is relative positioning, margining, centering, circular, visibility, dimension, chains is pretty neat. I'm going to give you an example. And then virtual helper and optimizer. So here, just a small example of relative positioning example. So let's say you have two views on to your activity on your screen. And what you like to do is you like to place them in the center or equally from the left and the right margins. So constraint layouts allows you to in fact do this. And here's the neat part, right? Here's the good news. You can actually use the interface or drag the elements right on your XML viewer, right, on your screen to position your views. You can always use the text view and design view, and I'm going to demonstrate as soon as I'm done with this, okay? But this is pretty powerful, keep that in mind. Here's a example of a constraint layout, and I'm going to use chains style example. So with chains as one of the options, right, you can actually create a spread chain among views, do a spread inside chain, weighted chain, packed chain, and packed chain with bias. So all you're doing is essentially placing your views within on top of your screen on your within the activity, right? And each of these views are constrained with each other, right? So it's very easy to place them within an activity. Third is the relative layout, which is a view group that simply displays the child views in relative positions to each other. The position of each view can be specified as relative to, again, sibling elements such as left, of, or below another view, or in positions relative parent itself. It's actually a pretty powerful utility for designing a UI because it can eliminate nested view groups and keep your layout hierarchy flat, which improves performance. So instead of using linear layout groups, right, you can use relative layout. So now the view and view groups are positioned relative to each other or relative to parent. So we can replace several nested linear layout groups and use a single relative layout. Perfect. So of course the word is practice, practice, and practice, but let me in fact give you a hands-on of what we just talked about, because of course you go through the concept and then it's easier to see how they're applied. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Android Studio and our app that we've been working on so far and demonstrate types of layouts, or especially the constraint layout. Okay, so once you're in the Android Studio, this is our app that we've been working with. I'm going to go ahead and go to the settings options for this particular app and use it as a floating mode. So I'm going to make it bigger, right, so you can actually see what we mean by the layouts and constraints and how to use some of these views. So again, this is just a high level. As we go forward with developing of our app, I'm going to of course get into more depth, but at this point in this lecture, I just want to keep it so that you understand the concept and how it's actually applied. So here's our app, and notice at this point I have a text view, right, that we've been working on so far along. So, but you were kind of thinking, hey, what are these lines, right? These squiggly lines going all across, up and down, and left and right. Well, these are your actual constraint, right, that you placed for this particular text view. Before I actually do this, on the first tool on the menu here, the design. So right now I'm just looking at the design itself. If I choose design and print, notice it gives me the blueprint, which is kind of neat because now I can add, let's say, more scales to it, and then I can start work on it more meticulously, okay, and carefully. And then the next tool, of course, is the orientation, right? I can do it. And then my Nexus 5, which is the type of SDK that I'm using at this time, the API. And then my app theme and default language. First, I can either declare or infer constraints. Right now, this is a constraint. So if I drag this particular view somewhere on top, notice it kind of tells me in the middle. So I don't have to worry about whether this is going to be in the middle or not. And this is now constrained to all sides, left, right, top, and bottom to the parent. Okay. So if I want to delete the bottom connection, I could do so. So as soon as I do it, notice it vertically aligns to the top. And if I enable or create the connection, then it's gonna drag and I can place it anywhere, and then depends on where I want placement to be. And notice it also shows me, you can just see it's 60. But it shows me that too as well. A little bit more clear on the design. That's why we use this option where now you can see it's about 60. Okay. Alright, so that way I can actually use the constraints and kind of take a look at where my text view group is. Now, how do I add more groups, or how do I use others, or create more views? There's an option called palette, okay, on the left here. So if I click on palette, it's going to give me most common text, button, widgets, layouts, containers, Google legacy, and so forth. And I can, of course, under common, I can use button, I can image view, recycler view, and so forth, and fragment. Okay, so as we go along, I'm going to get more in depth into these, but for right now, just to give you an idea of how constraints work. So for instance, if I have, let's say, an image view, I can simply drag view, and what it does, it opens up the resources dialog box, and of course asks me where the image is. Okay, so I can choose from my own or different. I'm just going to use, let's say, one of these sample ones here, and click OK, and this is going to place the image. Okay, again, I'm going to delete this after I'm done, just to give you an idea of how these work. Okay, if I can resize this particular view, if need be. Similarly, I can bring up the palette, and then I can drag another image. So same thing, I can use one of the avatars. In this instance, I'm going to use any one of these or the same one to give you an idea of how they work. So let's say we have these two images. Now if I want to place them here, how do I actually use the constraints, right? So I can use the constraints by creating or inferring a connection. So as soon as I infer a connection, I can then create the link. And notice how the arrows kind of goes from one image to the other, right? And a constraint is created. So now if I drag any one of these, they are constrained to each other. So that way you know exactly that that's 11 on the left, the margins, and then the 24 on the right. So now I have constrained them together, and this is a cycle chain mode. So that way it's easier for me to manage and then move about. So again, this is a little complex probably at this point in time for you, but not to worry. Once we go along, things will become easier, because I'm going to demonstrate each of these areas one by one as we go along in developing our apps. Here I just want to give you an example of working with constraints and how you can delete this particular connection, and it'll move the image next to first image. Okay, so that way you can now place images, you can create other views, you can do groups, you can add text view, buttons, and so forth. So I just wanted to cover quickly the concept of layouts. So go ahead, practice with this. Hope this helps. And with this, let's move to the next lesson.